So let's take a look at the customer needs analysis step of the engineering design process. And let's start by just looking at the purpose and why we're doing this. And the first stage is to look at trying to identify what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And it's a very critical step to identify what it is that you're trying to analyze, what it is you're trying to design, figuring out what does the customer need. I've worked on a lot of different senior design projects for different companies with some of my students here, and sometimes we've had a problem with trying to identify exactly what the need was, and so we weren't really solving the right problem at the beginning of the design process, and it kind of set us back in time, so we weren't getting done in time. So some goals of doing this is that we're trying to make sure that the product is focused on what the customer needs. So the customer needs something, we're trying to provide that for them with our product. We both want to identify the explicit needs that the customer says, but also the latent needs, which are kind of the unknown things, or maybe the hidden needs that the customer really aren't aware of at the time when they're first investigating their new product. And we want to provide some facts, some reasoning, some rationale for justifying why we're going to write specifications later on in the process. So we have some reason behind those, and we want to get a common understanding amongst the team members that we're trying to meet these specific needs that we've identified. So we look through the needs analysis process. The first thing we have to do is gather some raw data from the customers. Then once we have that information from them, we need to try to interpret it into a form that we can use, and then we're going to organize it into a hierarchy with some relative importance provided for each individual needs, and then we can make sure we can reflect on the process that we did it right. So we have to gather some raw data first. There's different ways you can do this. One way is through interviews, which is an easy way. It doesn't take too long. You can get quite a few different interviews done in a short period of time. And usually you probably want to have quite a few different interviews to get a lot of different viewpoints. For our project, we'll focus on a smaller group just to make it more manageable for us to handle as a team. We'll focus on these for our project. And another way to do it is using focus groups, which is like you gather a bunch of people together in a room, and then you kind of talk about the product, and maybe they answer questions, and people are kind of observing. Maybe you have some example products there that they can use, and they kind of talk about what they see there. They can maybe call the group back later on in the design process so that they can kind of see some prototypes. So those are usually a little more kind of a more focused group of people that you're using as a consumer base. Usually those people you pay because they're going to be coming back and spending more time there. So, but one thing we're trying to do is observe the product in use. That kind of helps figure out some of the needs of the user. So when we're looking at doing interviews, some potential questions you can ask is maybe when or why do you use this type of product? What do you like about existing products that are like this one? What do you not like about them? Maybe there's some dislikes they might have or some negative impressions they have. And maybe some improvements that they would like to make the product better. Those are just 4 easy questions you can ask. You can ask other ones too, but those are simple answers. And you like to get multiple answers for each of those questions that you ask a user rather than just one response. Try to get as many responses as you can from a user. Some hints for interacting with people well when you're interviewing them is to kind of go with the flow. Don't try to skip around or try to force them to change their train of thought. Maybe use some visuals, bring an object with you that is similar, or maybe a prototype or an existing product that you're trying to redesign. Bring that along so that you can show it to them. Maybe they can try it out. Don't try to bias their answers by kind of leading them on with certain questions, like saying, well, you don't really like this feature, do you? Because then you're kind of leading their answers on, kind of putting your own impression into the response. And maybe have them try it out. So maybe if you see they're using a tool or something like that, and they start hitting it like a hammer, and it's not really supposed to be used like that, but they're getting frustrated with it, you can kind of tell, maybe there's a problem there they have to deal with. And being alert for latent needs, which are needs that aren't really maybe they're aware of, or maybe something that you see that they try out. I had an electric screwdriver once that when you could use it in two different positions. You could have it straight, like a regular screwdriver, and you could use it for screwing in screws into a piece of wood. Or maybe if you were, that was maybe good if you were pushing down on it. If you were pushing into a wall, the handle on it, you're actually pushing a button on the handle, it would bend, and then it was more like a drill grip, and then you could drill the screws into the wall. So it was a little bit easier to hold on to, and something I wasn't really aware of before I got the screwdriver, but when I saw that, it was something that I liked, so that was kind of a late need for me. And maybe you can watch for some nonverbal information, if people seem frustrated or they seem happy using the product or trying it out. That's some good useful information you can get. And maybe you can have maybe one person asking questions and the other person can be taking notes. So if only one person's there, they ask a question, they start writing down notes, they lose eye contact, and the other person stops talking, and then you kind of lose your flow of your questions. So sometimes having an extra person there is helpful too. So then once you get all those statements together, then we try to consolidate them into what we call a customer data template. And you take all the surveys that you took, and you take the first question you asked everybody, you put all their responses down. The second question you asked everybody, you put all the responses down from all the interviews, etc. And then you have to interpret those statements into a customer need. Now, maybe some people said the same thing, so you don't have to repeat some of those questions or some of those responses to those questions. But then we try to get a need statement for each of those statements that was made by the customer or by the interview person. So we'll talk about that and how we can do that. So we have to interpret the needs from what the customer said into something that's a usable form that we as engineers can use to help make us make decisions in the design process. We need to take the statements that they said and interpret them into a need. So a lot of times it's a little bit confusing, but we want to try to take what they said and write it in a way that projects some function of the product that you're trying to design. Make it a statement about the function of the product, not the form or not the actual design choices that you're going to make. Some of the statements can be a little confusing, might be hard to understand exactly what they meant. Some may be contradictory to each other, and some of them might be unachievable. They want, they want all kinds of features, and they don't want it to cost anything. So some of them might be a little contradictory to each other. But we, as engineers, have to kind of do our best in weighing those options and coming up with the best design in the end. Then we take all the needs that we've written out and we try to list them in a hierarchy, which is kind of grouping them together into kind of primary needs and then a list of kind of real general primary needs. Then under those primary needs, we have some secondary needs which are kind of related to that primary need, maybe a few different viewpoints on what that need might be. And there could be tertiary or third level of needs. And sometimes it's helpful to kind of take all our need statements and write them on post-it notes and stick them all over a wall and then kind of match them up to which ones seem similar to each other and then trying to group them together and coming up with kind of, in this group they're all about kind of a similar topic, so that's your primary need, and this group is another similar topic, so it's another primary need, and then maybe all the statements underneath are secondary needs that are related to that. It helps us maybe also get rid of redundant need statements, so if you had a lot of similar statements from people, you'd only have to include them once. And we can kind of look for an overall label for each section as your kind of your primary need. And then we want to try to indicate which of these needs are important and which of them aren't maybe as important as others. So one way to do that is to kind of work with your group and kind of from their impressions of talking with the customers, they might get a good feel on which ones are most important and which ones are least important. Maybe you want to go back to some customers and have them give a rating on a 1 to 5 scale. That might help you kind of determine which is most important and which is least. And maybe you want to ask some questions about, do you see anything unique or exciting or unexpected about this product? And then that might help you identify what are some latent needs that the user maybe didn't realize beforehand that were hidden. We want to make sure that your surveys aren't getting too long though, because if they're too long, people kind of stop answering truthfully and they just want to get done with it. So if you can keep your questions, if you're going into further surveys into less than 50 questions, it's helpful to kind of keep that in track. Then at the end, you want to be able to reflect on the process. Did you kind of have a good process throughout? Did you try to, interpret all the needs and interact with a lot of customers? Did you hit enough people with questions that you kind of try to identify all the needs that might be out there? If you didn't have any latent needs, maybe you haven't asked enough questions. So we'll see if you've uncovered any of those. And is there any follow-up questions you need to ask, or any other surveys you need to take? Was anything unexpected from your group that you've noticed? And maybe is there some way that you can make it better? So that's kind of the overall customer needs analysis process, and we'll hopefully be able to conduct that on our project.